Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into a really pivotal moment in American history.
We are.
Specifically, why public opinion in the U.S. shifted so dramatically against the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
We've got information covering the early days of involvement right through to when, well, a lot of folks started questioning the whole effort.
Right. Our mission, you could say, is to pinpoint that turning point. What exactly caused that change?
Exactly. What were the key factors that made Americans rethink their support for the war?
And it's complex, you know?
hmm
It wasn't just one thing. It was happening over there, yes, but also very much a battle of ideas right here at home.
hmm
So to really get it, we need to unpack some key concepts and events that shaped how people viewed the war.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start with the Gulf Tonkin Resolution. This was pretty early on, 1964.
Yeah.
The official story involved an attack, or maybe supposed attacks, on U.S. ships by North Vietnam.
Right.
And Congress passed this resolution, which, well, it gave the president a huge amount of power to use military force.
Kind of a blank check, almost.
Yeah, without actually declaring war formally. But later, the details around that initial incident got pretty murky, didn't they?
They really did. And that's crucial. The government presented it as clear aggression needing a strong response.
hmm
But as time went on, questions popped up. Evidence suggested maybe it wasn't quite so straightforward,
hmm
and that planted the first seeds of doubt, this feeling that maybe the public wasn't getting the whole story. It sort of laid the groundwork for mistrust.
Which leads us perfectly into the next idea, the credibility gap.
Exactly.
So the government line was often optimistic, we're making progress, there's light at the end of the tunnel, that kind of thing.
Right, the official narrative.
But then people would turn on the TV news or read the papers and see, well, something very different.
Intense fighting, high casualties, images of destruction.
Yeah, and no clear end in sight. That disconnect, that gap between the official story and the reality people were seeing, that must have been hugely damaging to the government's credibility.
Oh, absolutely. Think about television's role then. It was new, in a way, bringing war into living rooms like never before.
Unfiltered, almost.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Unlike earlier wars, you often saw raw footage, reports that just didn't line up with the optimistic briefings from Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So this credibility gap, it just kept widening. People started asking, who do we actually believe here?
Yeah, a fundamental question. And then there was the draft.
The draft. That hit home for so many.
As the war escalated, the U.S. needed more and more soldiers, so they relied on conscription. Young men were required to serve.
And that directly affected families all across the country, didn't it?
Yeah.
It wasn't some abstract policy anymore.
It makes it personal, right? It forces people to ask if the war is worth that kind of sacrifice.
And the system itself,
Yeah.
it wasn't always seen as fair. There were ways to get deferments college, for instance,
Right.
which often meant that young men from working-class backgrounds, maybe minority groups, were disproportionately drafted.
Uh-huh.
That perception of inequality definitely fueled resentment. Why should some have to go when others didn't? Especially for a war, people were starting to question.
It changes everything when it could be your son, your brother, your neighbor being forced to fight. It makes you scrutinize the reasons much more closely.
No doubt.
And the way the war was fought was also a huge factor, wasn't it? This wasn't like World War II battles. It was guerrilla warfare.
That's a really critical point. The Viet Cong, they didn't fight in neat lines or big open battle.
No uniforms blending in.
Exactly. Surprise attacks, ambushes, booby traps, hit-and-run tactics. It was incredibly tough for American soldiers trained for more conventional combat.
Frustrating and dangerous.
Extremely. It led to high casualties and this nagging feeling of fighting an enemy you couldn't really pin down, you couldn't easily defeat.
Yeah.
This unconventional warfare really challenged American expectations and added to the sense that maybe this wasn't a war we could just win in
Yeah.
the traditional sense.
Right. And while all of this was happening, you had major social changes back home, like the rise of the New Left.
Yes, the 1960s were a time of huge upheaval. The New Left was largely made up of young people pushing for big societal changes.
Civil rights, equality.
Exactly. And they were strongly, strongly against the Vietnam War. Groups like SDS Students for a Democratic Society became really prominent.
Organizing protests.
Yeah, campus protests, draft resistance. They really mobilized and gave a powerful voice to that growing anti-war feeling.
So they weren't just reflecting dissent, they were actively building it.
Absolutely. They tapped into that unease people were feeling and amplified it, challenged the establishment narrative.
And connected to that, you had the free speech movement. It started, I think, at UC Berkeley.
That's right. Initially, it was about campus rules, students' rights to political activity on campus.
But it quickly broadened.
It did and became closely linked with the anti-war movement. Students started using the principles of free speech to protest the war itself.
So college campuses became these centers of debate and activism against the war.
Definitely. The free speech movement provided a sort of moral and legal framework for dissent. It established campuses as key places for organizing and challenging government policy. It shows how different movements can feed into each other.
All this led to the country becoming really divided, didn't it? Into doves and hawks.
A stark division. The Doves were against the war. They argued it was morally wrong, unwinnable, costing too many lives, both American and Vietnamese.
Not it out.
Essentially, yes. De-escalation, withdrawal. Then you had the Hawks.
Supporting the war effort.
Right. They usually emphasized the Cold War context. Stopping the spread of communism was paramount. They believed America had to stay the course, maybe even escalate, to achieve victory and maintain credibility.
It sounds incredibly polarized, a nation split right down the middle.
It truly was. It dominated political debate, family arguments. It was everywhere. And that kind of deep internal division makes it incredibly hard for a country to sustain a major war effort.
Yeah, it must undermine support, morale, everything. And then, in the midst of all this, came January 1968, the Tet Offensive.
Ah, Tet, yes. A massive turning point.
What exactly happened?
Well, during Tet, the Vietnamese New Year holiday, usually a time of truce, the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong launched coordinated surprise attacks across South Vietnam. Cities, towns, military bases. Even the U.S. Embassy in Saigon was attacked.
Wow. So much for the idea the enemy was on the ropes.
Precisely. Militarily, the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces eventually beat back the attacks, inflicted heavy losses. But psychologically and politically, it was devastating for the administration's narrative.
Because it showed the enemy was far from defeated.
Exactly. It showed they could strike anywhere, anytime, even in supposedly secure areas.
Yeah.
It just shattered that official optimism that the war was nearly won.
And the images, the media coverage must have been intense.
It was. Seeing fierce fighting in the streets of Saigon, reading about the scale of the offensive, it shocked Americans.
Right into their living rooms again.
Yep. And it made that credibility gap seem like a chasm. Many people who had maybe been on the fence or even supportive started thinking, wait a minute, what is really going on here? Can we actually win this?
It solidified the doubt.
It really did. It fueled the anti-war movement like never before and led to a significant, measurable drop in public support for the war. It forced a major reassessment.
So pulling it all together, the shift in public opinion wasn't down to just one cause.
No, definitely not. It was a confluence of factors.
You had the initial doubts sown by the Gulf of Tonkin incident.
Right, that seed of mistrust.
Then the growing credibility gap, fueled by the difference between official reports and media coverage.
A feeling of being misled.
The draft making the war deeply personal and raising fairness questions.
A direct impact.
The frustrating nature of guerrilla warfare, the rising casualties,
Yeah.
leading to disillusionment.
A sense of a costly stalemate.
Then you have the organized opposition from the New Left and SDS, amplified by the free speech movement.
Giving voice and structure to dissent.
The deep national division between doves and hawks reflecting the struggle.
Polarization.
And then the Tet Offensive acting as this major shockwave, powerfully amplified by the media, which really solidified anti-war sentiment for many.
Absolutely. Tet crystallized all those building doubts and frustrations. It exposed the gap between rhetoric and reality in a way that couldn't be ignored, leading to that decisive shift against the war.
It's a powerful example of how different pressures can combine to change the course of public feeling.
Indeed.
As we wrap up this deep dive, it really leaves us with some things to think about, doesn't it?
Lovely.
Like, how does that erosion of trust in government back then compare to public trust in institutions,
Sure.
today? Are there echoes?
That's a big question. And the role of the media.
Right. How media shapes opinion on conflicts. How different is it now with the internet, social media, compared to the TV era of Vietnam?
Vastly different landscape, potentially even more fragmented.
Yeah. And finally, just thinking about the power we saw then, the power of social movements, of individual voices, to really challenge the official story and influence policy.
Yeah. It makes you reflect on how public opinion, once mobilized, can become a real force in shaping history. What lessons can we draw from that today?
Lots to consider. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.